Hi, and welcome to the Men on the Path to Love podcast. Bonus episode, Is There Still Goodwill Toward Men? A conversation with author Jack Kammer. Jack is the author of the book Goodwill Toward Men, 1994 and 2025. Women talk candidly about the balance of power between the sexes. It's a topic many men are thinking about, but not always talking about openly. And what makes this book fascinating is that Jack originally published it more than 30 years ago, after interviewing 22 highly educated and accomplished women about their honest views on men, feminism, power, and the evolving dynamics between the sexes. Jack was a guest on this podcast last year before he revisited those conversations decades later, and the questions raised feel just as relevant today. In this episode, Jack and I explore those themes like the balance of power between men and women, the cultural narratives about masculinity, and whether genuine goodwill and mutual understanding between the sexes is even possible in today's climate. It's a thoughtful, candid discussion that I think many of you will find both challenging and encouraging. I know I sure did. So stick around. You just might learn something. It's the Men on the Path to Love podcast. Welcome, Jack, once again to Men on the Path to Love.
Well, thank you, Bill. I am very glad to be here on Men on the Path to Love, and also to be a man on the path to even deeper love with his lovely wife.
Oh, that's a beautiful thing. Well, Jack, let's go back to 1994, and you decided to write this book, Goodwill Toward Men. What inspired you to do that back then?
Well, what inspired me to write the book was what inspired me to get interested in what's going on with men in the first place. The active involvement goes back to 1983. Since then, I was able to retrace other incidents in my life all the way back to my childhood. But what sparked the book was the same thing that came up for me in 1983. It just became clear, or at least it seemed clear to me, that the male point of view was just not really very well understood. And it was really important to hear from women who did have a better understanding of men and appreciation of men than was generally available in the culture, especially in the media.
Right.
There seemed to be a lot of bad will toward men. I had hoped that the book would help increase goodwill toward men, but I don't know. I don't think I mentioned it very much in the book, but my book was basically canceled before canceling was a thing.
Oh, yeah.
The staff at St. Martin's Press decided they didn't like my book, and they were not going to help sell it or promote it.
And those were women.
I think they were probably all women. At least the ones I heard negative things from were all women.
Right.
Which sort of flies in the face of the idea that, men have all the power. Because, many of the big executives at the publishing firms back then were men. Now it's much more of a female field. But the women who were at very much staff level said, we're not going to promote this. We don't like this book.
Wow.
Sort of bad will toward men, basically.
Right away. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you decided to revise this book in 2025. I'm just curious, as you, I would assume, reread those interviews 30 years later. I'm just curious what struck you the most, now versus then with those women.
What I added to the book in the 2025 version was a new introduction,
right,
and 3 appendices. Did you get a chance to read the appendices?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay. And basically, from 1983 to today, I've been very actively involved in male gender issues. And I don't think much has happened in a positive way for men in anything near the positive way things have changed for women. And I wanted to call attention to that fact that there seems to me to be more bad will toward men today than there was when I wrote the book Goodwill Toward Men hoping to increase goodwill toward men. And I wanted to take a shot at trying to explain in 2025 what is going on that there is so much bad will toward men.
Yeah.
And I made a case for it in the appendices. And I would love to hear from you very quickly about what you think of the case I made about what was going on or what is going on among many women, not all women, but among many women, to create an atmosphere of men just sort of feeling like they're in their foxholes and they got to keep their head down and they got to just shut up and they can't say anything. And it's war for many men. They feel so beleaguered, so belittled, so unappreciated, so blamed for everything that goes on at a macro level. And that's a big difference between you and me. You work at the clinical level with individual men.
Right.
I work at the macro level, and I look at what's going on across the political fabric of our country, and I see heavy concentrations of bad will toward men, primarily among well-funded organizations that get a lot of money from philanthropies that still believe that the most progressive thing in America today is helping women overcome their quote unquote oppression, when I believe that the most progressive movement in America today is the need or the incipient effort to do for men what we have done for women in terms of opening up options for how we get to live our lives.
I think back to the feminist movement in the 60s and, a lot of that man hating and in reading the different interviews with these women, it seemed you had the really strong, more radical side, and then you had more understanding and all that. But I think, up to the 2000s and here recently with the Me Too movement, I think that's just really sparked it to more of a radical side. And then you have the more right conservative side pushing harder to present us as the old traditional conditioning male.
Yeah, and so we got polarization, and neither side is really doing a very good job of being honest, telling the truth, having any nuance. And it's, black and white and good and bad, and it's not very helpful. Now you mentioned the Me Too movement.
Mm-hmm.
The Me Too movement was very largely involved in creating bad will toward men.
Mm-hmm.
Because Harvey Weinstein, Epstein, those guys were bad.
Yeah, rightly so. Yeah.
But they are not every man. And of course, women will say, yeah, but it's always a man. It's not every man, but it's always a man. The Me Too movement sowed a lot of rancor towards men.
Yes.
I think that that movement really pales in comparison to what I think is the most distorted, most destructive, most unscientific, most wrong, most ideologically bent against men. And that is the whole idea of violence against women, men's violence against women, domestic violence against women. The federal government spends something like $1 billion a year, a billion with a B, $1 billion a year on violence against women. When science shows, and Suzanne Steinmetz in the book, the interview in the book, made it very clear that the science does not show that domestic violence is the equivalent of men beating women, that it goes both ways.
Exactly. Yeah.
And one of the very interesting facts that I don't think we mentioned in the book, but which has subsequently been found to be true, is that domestic violence is said to be, by the ideological feminists who have a lot of good jobs in the domestic violence industry, organization after organization after organization, funded by philanthropy after philanthropy after philanthropy. These women are making pretty good money, and they're raising money through fear and outrage The thing that's not mentioned in the discussion about the patriarchy and how domestic violence is an effort by men to continue their control and oppression of women
Yeah.
is sort of demonstrated to be hardly true when you look at the fact that domestic violence between lesbians, women against women, is the highest category of all.
Wow.
That does not comport with the ideological bias on which the fundraising is done, that domestic violence has to stop because it's just a continuation and another variation of men's oppression of women. It's just not true.
It's not true.
Now,
And I've been in that situation myself, and it's being on the other end of that in a domestic violence situation. And I think for men, and a lot of the women mentioned this in the book, that we as men are afraid to admit that that has happened. So we don't come forth. And so, and women to a certain degree, but most men, it's too much of a crush to our ego to have to admit that a woman was committing violence towards us.
Yeah. And could we use a word other than ego there, Bill? Because, the whole idea of the male ego.
I just threw that in, but yeah.
Well, what could we call it? What could we call it besides male ego? Isn't it just the male integrity, male?
Well, I mean, if you look at ego, it's that male ego, but it's just ego in general. It's that outwardly part of us that we don't want to reveal what's really inside. So whatever that mechanism is that's protecting us from revealing what's real, and then add the social conditioning on top of that, then that's where you get the stereotype of the quote unquote male ego.
Yeah.
But what I appreciated about the interviews, and a kind of a thread that I saw through it, was that here are these highly educated women, prominent in their fields, and I just found it encouraging that these women, they really express genuine goodwill toward men, and were able to deflect some of the radical feminist views, and we're really open to, let's work this out. There is a lot of goodwill towards men. They gave us that goodwill in those interviews. What do you think allowed them to do that in being interviewed by a man?
Well, I think that there are probably many, 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 many women who feel goodwill toward men.
Yeah, sure.
But sort of the cool girls in the school, the mean girls in the school, the clique of powerful and influential girls in the sisterhood.
And their egos, okay?
Yes, okay. Really. Yeah. Isn't that the truth? We don't talk about the female ego very much.
Right.
Yeah. My hope for the book was that it was going to sort of be a new version of, the Empress is wearing no clothes. And to encourage many women to say, I read this book and it's really true. And come on, ladies, let's get off of this beating up on men thing.
Right.
There's a lot of good things about men that really deserve to be recognized and appreciated. And let's just try to be empathic about what it's like being a man these days and how men are being browbeaten and trashed right and left. Let's not let the small minority of women who are making tons of money as professional feminists and having tremendous influence over our politics and over our media control the public discourse about our men. Let's stop this. And, the very small number of women at St. Martin's Press who decided they didn't like my book were very influential in making sure that my hope for the book, my dream for the book, had any chance of being realized.
Yeah, it's such a shame. I mean, it seems so unfair. And then they're like, oh, poor baby, you've been unfair to us all this time, blah, blah, blah. But, there was a question that you asked. It was a very powerful question that I made note of. And you asked the question, why do we interpret men's difficulties as evidence of inferiority rather than as burdens we've carried?
That's in, I think, the new introduction. And I mentioned that in the context of recent research I only know of one study that showed this. I don't know of any studies that showed to the contrary, but the largest implicit bias of all, it's not against women. It's not even against ethnic minorities. It's against men. The largest negative implicit bias of all is against men.
I'd have to agree with that. Yeah.
Now, my heart immediately goes to the men who are both men and Black men, because there is implicit bias against men
Absolutely.
and Blacks. And who gets the double dose, the double whammy? Black men and Native American men.
Sure.
Men on the reservation are, they're not exactly living large.
Well, it's minority men in general, I would say,
Yeah, yes,
Latinos as well,
yes, I think that's true. Of course, the burden that white men have is everybody thinks, well, he's a white male, and so he must be, the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. What's he got to complain about? Well, not every white male is a member of the Fortune 500 club. And I'd like to talk about how we really need to be talking about the misfortune 5 million.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt.
And we don't.
Yeah.
And we don't. So why do we have this tendency to see that men's job sort of inevitably gets us into situations where violence is more likely to occur than it is, say, in a daycare center or in a nice office? Men are competing. They have to compete. Our job is to provide. What does provide mean? Well, it means, as a practical matter, you try to gather up as many scarce resources as you can. And what that means is you're going to be competing in some very strenuous ways with other men who are trying to do exactly the same thing.
Right. Why?
Because that's how we get our props in life. We get our pride in life by largely how well we fulfill the provider role.
Yeah, and I recently did an episode on that, about being the provider just isn't enough anymore. And one of the women in the book was saying how women have more of an advantage there in terms of options. Our main goal, as we've been conditioned, is to be the provider, as you're saying. And she was saying that, well, women are more like, they get to go have babies and be the mother and the nurturer and live that domestic piece, as well as being in the provider role. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think that points exactly to what I was trying to say in the appendices of the book. The bottom line for me is that the only way we are going to improve relationships between men and women, and one of the ways we are going to be able to alleviate a lot of the stresses that our children are growing up with, especially our boys, is to make sure that men have as many options for how they live their lives as women have. Back in the 1940s, during World War II, we had the image of Rosie the Riveter.
Oh,
and
yeah.
she's a beloved character because she made the point that women were capable of much more than the standard cultural image of woman portrayed. Women could do other things. Many women loved the idea of Rosie the Riveter. It was a very suboptimal thing to have women's talents wasted. And I'm talking about the talents of women who really didn't feel like they wanted to be raising kids.
Right.
But if they said, I don't really want to raise kids, I want to be a lawyer, they could be subjected to some pretty bad criticism. What?
Sure.
You are not wishing to fulfill your natural role as a mother? You don't have a mothering instinct? What's wrong with you? Well, it's a good thing that we confronted that. And we realized that it wasn't the woman who had something wrong with her, it was our expectations of women that had something wrong with it. Well, I proposed this idea of Rosie the Riveter's counterpart, and I call him Charles the Child Raiser, I think is what I called him.
Mm-hmm.
And we are doing the mirror image of the bad thing we did to women. We waste a lot of male talent by telling men, regardless of who they are, what their psychological or emotional makeup is, that your job, the way for you to get respect and to be regarded as a valuable citizen, is to get out there and make as much money as you can. Well, there are a lot of men who are really wonderful people who are just no good at making money.
Yeah.
Especially in a corporate setting where it's so full of politics and insincerity and backstabbing and maneuvering and phoniness, that to tell men that you got to go in there and live that life, and that's how you demonstrate how wonderful you are, I think that creates problems that you end up seeing at the clinical level.
Absolutely. The pressure to be in that role and to provide. And I think about my own journey of being a single dad at one point in my life. And I was able to balance the two. I had an interesting job. It was a radio job that gave me some flexibility and a really good salary to get support. But I enjoyed being with my daughter and being that single dad. Yeah, it was stressful, a lot of stuff, and I had to learn. It's what got me into therapy because I wanted to be a good dad. But you don't see a lot of guys aspiring to do that. To me, it was kind of out of necessity and my own personal growth. And some men, yes, I live in a pretty liberal area here in Philadelphia, and you see men carrying the babies in the little pouches, and there's a lot of that here. But more on the grand scheme of things, it's not a whole lot of men are aspiring to do that. They may want to on the inside, but they wouldn't dare project it outwardly.
Yes, and you're pointing to a very interesting nuance to this problem. The bottom line of my thesis about why there is more bad will toward men today than there was in the past is because there is this groundswell of men who are saying to themselves and sort of whispering to each other, some more openly than others, some men proudly doing it, of being the primary parent and doing it really well. And when you talk to fellas who are full-time dads, many of them will say that the biggest trick for them to pull this off and make it successful and happy for them was that they had to say to the mother, I parent differently.
That's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I parent differently.
It's a different way of doing it. Yeah.
A different way of doing it. And it's been very beneficial in a lot of ways.
I just thought about, I'm a facilitator on this website called mensgroup.com. And I see that frequently with the men that are there. And they're not these, new age guys, sensitive new age guys, or however you want to say it, or liberal guys. They're just regular Joes, and they love being with their kids. They love being the parent,
Yes.
And so,
yes.
To your point, I see that in my practice too.
And so how is this connected to the increase that I believe has occurred and is still occurring in bad will toward men? I think the reason is very much like all of the negative stereotyping we had about women after World War II.
Right.
How did we get Rosie the Riveter to go back home?
Mm-hmm.
Let men have their jobs back. Well, we did it by trashing women. Women aren't smart. They aren't tough. They aren't capable. They can't do math. They cry too much. They can't make tough decisions. Blah, 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 blah. Stereotype upon stereotype upon stereotype.
Right.
To try to keep women disfavored in men's traditional domain. What's happening today? What we're talking about is women's traditional domain being that they have the option now to stay in that traditional domain of being the mother, if that's what they want to be full time.
Right.
Or they have the option, and they have multiple variations of the option to also have a job in which they get to make money.
Yeah.
Well, if you love having those options, if it is very much a part of your female ego that you're the mother, you're the nurturer, and women create life, which is not true. A sperm without an egg without a sperm is like a sperm without an egg.
Yeah.
Doesn't amount to much.
Takes two.
It's the sperm and the egg getting together that creates the life.
Right.
The woman incubates the life, carries the life, delivers the life, and we need to be thankful that they are willing to do that.
Yes.
But they don't create life.
Mm-hmm.
They deliver life. And that's a very different thing. And men, every bit as much, maybe even more in some ways, because we create bazillions of sperm compared to the number of eggs a woman carries. We're creating life in a different way.
Right.
So the reason I think there is more bad will toward men today than in the past is because women have to do to men what we did to women. To keep women out of the male domain, we had to trash women with stupid stereotypes. To keep men out of the female domain, with all of these guys that you're talking about who love being with their kids, we have to keep them away. How do we do that? Well, we talk about Me Too. They're sexual abusers. They can't be trusted. Don't let a kid be with a man because he's violent. He's a sexual pervert.
Right.
But as I mentioned earlier, the worst stereotype is men's violence against women, because that comes up very often in an untrue way with false allegations of men as domestic violence perpetrators.
Yeah, and that whole tricky thing with false accusations of rape and all that. I mean, that's so complicated.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when your ability to be the primary parent is on the line, you're the mother, and you're the primary parent, you got this guy who's saying, no, he wants to be equal to you as a parent, and your marriage falls apart. Yeah, maybe when you were all in love as newlyweds, you talked about 50-50 parenting and sharing the roles. But when you're done with him, you don't want to share with him. You don't want to be stuck living in the same town as him. You want to maybe move to Indiana where you got a job. How do you get to do that? Well, you convince the judge this guy is a really bad person and the kids are afraid of him.
Yeah, and the mother's influence, in judging her ex-husband and in front of the kids and all that. I hear that a lot in my practice. And I also see a lot of men staying in an unhealthy relationship so they don't have to go through that, so they can be with their kids. And that was even mentioned in your book as well.
Yes. And so we need to do for men what we have done for women. We take a look at these stereotypes and say, men aren't perfect, true. And there are men who commit sexual harassment.
Of course.
True. There are men who commit violence. True. However, you are slightly exaggerating this to maintain for yourself your advantages and at the same time allow yourself to pretend to be interested in equality between the sexes, because you're milking that for all it's worth when it's you who is the victim of the gender stereotype.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the man listening who really values women, a feminist in his own way, and all about equality and all that. But he feels dismissed, especially now with the Me Too, even more alert with, oh my God, I can't say anything, and being afraid, walking on eggshells, and or afraid of being demonized. What would you say to those guys that are hearing that?
I would say that we're not going to be able to do it alone. We have to have alliances with women. We need to have women of goodwill toward men stand up and say to their girlfriends, let's look at what we're doing here. This is not right. Yeah, there's a sisterhood, and we love having girls' night out where we get to talk about how silly and stupid and dumb and clueless men are, and that's kind of fun in a way. And whenever there's a disagreement between you and your husband, I'm going to take your side, sister, girlfriend,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to say, oh, must have been really hard for you to kick him out of the kids' lives.
Yeah, right.
The sisterhood is powerful, and it can be powerfully destructive.
Do you think it can be possible for men to advocate without being anti-women, like, reversing that? Can we find that middle ground like these women did in your book? They found that middle ground to be able to say, hey, let's come together here. Let's work this out.
Yes, and I do think it's possible, and it's going to require men to say things like this. Look, I love you. You're important to me. I think you're great, but
And
and you're not perfect. Can you admit you're not perfect?
that goes
Can
both
you?
ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's no doubt that men are imperfect. Talking about male foibles requires no courage at all in 2026.
Well, and it's easy to point fingers and blame. I mean, that's an
Yes,
easy way out. Yeah.
it's much more difficult for a man to say, women do bad things too. Oh, yeah, well, name one thing that we do.
Yeah.
And then
right.
you name one thing that women generally do. Well, you are a misogynist.
Right.
It's so
It's dangerous
there's
territory. If you got to be open-minded on both sides.
and the side that is most closed right now is the sisterhood having a field day with the advantages it gets with pretending men are stupid, clueless, ignorant,
Right.
bad, dismissible. We don't even really need them for the future.
And I've heard guys say a lot of things about women too in these men's groups. Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. What there's doubt about is whether men are even needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are people writing books
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
men even needed?
Or there was one woman that said they were talking about how all men are rapists.
Yeah.
It's just absurd. That's just another example of the extreme.
Well, that's an example of how women can say outrageously horrible things about men. And that's considered sisterhood and feminism and empowerment. But if a man dares to say something like, sometimes women, they have these whispering campaigns where they can completely trash a man
Yeah.
just by whispering
Exactly.
about him.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such misogyny. And this part needs to be emphasized. Most women love their husbands.
Sure.
I think it's probably true. Would you think that's true?
Absolutely.
Yet the sisterhood makes it uncool to stand up for your man when the girls want to have a good laugh about how stupid men are.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a fashion. It's a trend. It's a very fun and attractive fad. And
you can get the joke, but enough's enough.
Enough is enough.
Where's the other side? Where's the reinforcement?
Yes. And in a way, one of the ways we can appeal to women to, come on, knock it off.
Mm-hmm.
Stand up to your lady friends and say, ladies, we got to stop this. This is wrong, by looking at your sons. What is this doing to your boys?
Exactly.
For them to feel so inferior compared to girls. Girls rule, boys drool is a t-shirt that girls can wear at the school.
Yeah.
And nobody says anything about that.
Yeah.
That's empowerment.
Yeah, I know. And I wish that we could just be open and vulnerable and be real instead of having all this old subconscious conditioning just getting in the way of coming together. And I know that sounds very idealistic, and we got a long way to go before we even get close to that. And I just want to say how much this book helped me in terms of what I do in relationship coaching, and hearing all these different women find that middle ground to where they were showing appreciation, were showing goodwill toward men, And that opened my eyes when I'm speaking with my female clients and they're talking about their spouse or partner. It's like, hey, let's give him some grace here. This is years and millennials of conditioning that we're trying to release here. And it's not going to happen overnight. You know, give him a chance to try, give him a chance to love the way he loves, and try to find some middle ground in there. That was really helpful for me to hear all these different women's opinions. Because I don't always get that in my work. You know, I get all the negative stuff, and to hear women actually praising men and appreciating men and showing goodwill toward men was, again, very encouraging for me. And, you know, Jack, I'm thinking at the end of the day, you know, you've kind of answered this already, but I want to ask you again, more specifically, what does goodwill towards men look like in terms of relationship, in terms of family, and our society in general?
Easing up on narrow expectations of men.
Mm,
Recognizing that men are as different and as varied and as human as women are.
yeah.
We have changed our expectations of women, and women are better off for it. Now, it is true that there are still a lot of women who are suffering very deep psychological stress over having to do it all.
Yeah, I hear it every day in my work with the women that, you know, they're trying to do it all themselves and they're not getting any support.
It's no doubt true.
Mm-hmm.
To do the same thing for men would sort of establish the fact, you know, you don't have to do it all
Mm-hmm.
because I'm here wanting to do half of it.
The women I've talked to, they would love to have that attitude, but
Well,
unfortunately, they can't do it. It's like them trying to get their men to support and be there, and they're absent, not even trying. It's one thing to want to, and the woman is saying, "No, I got this. I'm going to take care of these kids," and blah, blah, you know, and take ownership of that, versus they're struggling financially, emotionally, needing that additional support, needing the father figure in their lives. You know, these are single women that I'm talking about that the men are absent. That's a different story.
well, yes. And the idea of men being absent raises in our minds the idea of the irresponsible father.
Right,
In,
right.
in my work as a parole and probation agent,
Mm-hmm.
working for the National Fatherhood Initiative, I am very clear about the need to recognize that many fathers are absent, not because they wanted to leave, but because they were escorted to the door.
Yeah,
If
and
if
that's a
you
different story too. I mean, you know, it's complicated. It
It is
really is.
complicated. And we talk about one side of the complication.
Right.
We don't talk about the other side of
Yeah.
the complication that could be the key to resolving the side that we are beating our heads about.
Sure. And it's
Which
not necessarily that some of them are being irresponsible. It's the position that they're in, that there's no way out, or if they feel that there's no way out.
and there are also women who don't want a way out
Well, of course. Yeah, that's the other
because
side.
they're
Another
because
side. Yeah.
yes, those women who do not have fabulous careers, who might have bad educations, bad opportunities in life, lower on the socioeconomic scale,
Right.
they tend to be in the same milieu as men on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are a man who is in the same neighborhood or in the same community as a woman whose primary identity, primary source of pride and female ego
Mm-hmm.
is to be the mother. What do we want from you? Where's the money? Don't
Mm-hmm.
be talking to me about chump change. Where's the money?
Yeah.
And what does that do to men who are very often breaking the law, largely in jail, hurting people, shooting people, dealing drugs? We could do a lot of good for helping those men who have a lot of heart and care and love for their children have opportunities other than making money to demonstrate their love for their children. And
Yeah.
I heard that all the time when I was a parole and probation agent in central Baltimore, which is a very beleaguered city.
Yeah. Charm City,
Um,
right?
Charm City.
Another thing I really appreciated about the book is that you really went after some hard issues like you were just talking about. Rape, domestic violence, addiction, all those things that you're referencing, and no holds barred. I mean, you really covered a lot of really serious topics. This was no fluff. I mean, this was real. I really got that sense.
I often think, how much better would life be for everybody if we changed what we expect of our men
Hmm.
and rewrote the male job description to include things like being sweet, kind, patient, loving, fun with kids?
Hmm.
What is masculinity? Well, I am resolutely against trying to establish a rigid definition of masculinity.
I love your
Um,
definition, by the way, that we talked about last time. I want to hear it again. It deserves to be heard again. I love it.
okay. Oh, okay. So, my definition of a real man,
Yes.
it's a man who does not care at all about anybody else's definition of a real man.
Yeah, I love that.
All right,
Perfect.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Suppose we were to grant that idea of being a real man.
Hmm.
Imagine if men at the bottom of the lowest rungs of our society didn't have to obsess about, I don't have any money, and that's the only thing I am going to be loved for, because the women around here don't have any money either, and they need some. And so I'm going to be valued for how much money I can provide.
Exactly.
And that's exclusively it. She doesn't care about my love because she's the one who does the loving. She
Mm.
needs me to be out there kicking butt, taking names, and bringing home money. If men were relieved of that obligation and could have a healthy ego, could have a healthy sense of themselves, have pride in themselves, feel integrity, feel like they're really important people in their community, in their families, to their partners, to their children. The most important thing for you to do, Joe, is to be a good guy.
There you go.
And you know what being a good guy is. It's not how bad you are. It's not how many people you can beat up. It's not how many drugs you can sell. It's not about bringing home money.
Mm-mm.
Yes, we do want you to be a provider, but there is something else besides money that we don't have enough of,
Yeah.
and that's love.
Love,
And you
man.
can provide that.
That's
And I'm
right.
going to value you for how much you can love
Yeah,
your own
man.
kid.
And here we are moving into this age of Aquarius. And so it's here now. And so hopefully some of this balance will come into play as we move forward. And I think it's going to get a little worse than it before it gets better. I think we just got to keep hope alive and keep love alive and keep it going. You know.
When living things are healthy and balanced, they flourish. You're not losing power, you're creating more power. You're
Yeah.
creating more happiness for yourself. That needs to happen. But right now, the people who are not on board with that are largely the women who control our media and our politics. I don't think they're representative of every woman in America, but
No,
they
of
are
course
the
not.
most powerful.
Yeah.
They are the most influential. It could really help if we had social policies that recognize men for the values that they have other than how much money they can provide and how tough they can be.
Absolutely. And to your point about power, that's what I work with in relationship coaching is it's not about power, it's being true to you, being real, being authentic, and how can we work together to collaborate as a team versus trying to outpower one another. And when you try to be right, you try to outpower, you're just going to meet power with power. And that can go on forever. And where's your happiness? Where's your love? Where's your connection? And it ain't about the power, it's about how can we work together. And that's what it's all
Yep.
about.
Yep.
Well, Jack, I really appreciate talking with you once again. And this book, I'll be frank, I do a lot of interviews with authors and I'll skim the book. I read this book, man, and I just couldn't put it down. And not so much from a compelling thing, it was just, it helped me to understand women. And I think women need to read this book to hear these women saying what they were saying, this and offering this goodwill toward men. I just wish those who were more short-sighted or more extreme, whatever, were to hear these women and embrace a lot what they were saying, because that's where I saw the balance, and that's where I saw we can come together, we can collaborate. So thank you for your efforts 30 years ago and 30 plus years ago and now. And I wish you much success with your book.
Well, I want to thank you for the work you do and are doing and continue to do, because you're doing it with individual men. You work with men in a very deep and important way, and probably not only change lives, but save lives.
Well, that's the hope. It's that love mission, man. We got to keep love alive.
Yes, sir. You're doing wonderful work, Bill, and I love your podcasts, and I listen to them.
Great.
I really do.
Well, I do appreciate that. That means a lot to me, Jack.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, until next time, keep your heart open and stay on the path of love, my friend.
Thanks. Take care, Bill.
You too. And that's a wrap for this bonus episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast. Is there still goodwill toward men? A conversation with author Jack Kammer. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. Thank you so much for listening. And I want to thank Jack Kammer once again for joining me and for sharing his thoughtful perspective on these important conversations between men and women. And if you'd like to learn more, you can pick up Jack's book, Goodwill Toward Men, on Amazon or through multiple retailers by visiting his website at jackkammer.com. There's 2 K's in there, okay? Jack Kammer, all right, .com. And if you got something out of listening to this podcast or know someone who needs to hear it, then please share the link to this podcast and share the love. And until next time, keep your heart open and stay on the path to love.